So welcome to another episode of Max Attack. In today's extremely exciting episode, we're doing the Cambelt on this lovely Vauxhall Zafira B. The procedure for this is the same for pretty much all 1.6 and 1.8 litre petrol engines from 2003 up to 2013-14, depending on exactly when your car was manufactured. It's quite a simple job, so let's get into it. So we start by removing this little T20, I think it is, possibly a T25 at the back of the airbox down here. I got to mine with a little extension and a universal joint. Just break that loose. These aren't very tight, they don't need to be tightened back up very much either. And we're doing this because that's what holds the airbox on at the back. So once we've got that off and out to the side, we just need to remove this little Jubilee clip here. 7mm on that, and then we can just pull that pipe off. Now once this pipe is off, these airboxes, they're a little bit snug, so there's a pipe at the front here. You can see me there just pulling it off, not very difficult. So you kind of need to pull it up and forwards and then tip it on its side, which you'll see me do in a second. It basically gets caught on the on the screen as you're looking at it now, on the bottom left hand side there's a piece of plastic on the airbox that it gets caught on. There we go, she's out, put that to one side. Now the wheels on this were seriously tight. Yours probably won't be as tight as this, but this was next level. And I like to put my wheel underneath the pinch weld just for an extra measure of security. And now we'll just remove the upper timing cover. These are some E-Torx bolts, but you can just use a 6-sided 10mm normal socket to get these out. They're not very tight. You can see there, that's the shape of these bolts. And if you own a Vauxhall, you should go ahead and get yourself a nice big set on a socket rail, because you're going to use them a lot. Even in this job you'll use various different sizes. So there should be a splash guard here, be a little Torx screw up top where I pointed, and then these bits here are held in with some clips, and then underneath there should be 2 more Torx bolts, but somebody has, I don't know, maybe got damaged or broken or someone's removed it. So this is another Torx bolt. This is an E18. And this is for the crank pulley. We won't actually take the crank pulley off just yet, but while we're down here I will show that to you. So what we want to do is just support the engine with a jack before we remove the engine mount. And since we're in the area, we'll start draining the coolant. So that is just a normal righty tighty lefty loosey. It helps to pull it as you untighten it, and then you just get a little hose on the end of the drain and pop it in a container. Just down there. Very simple. And now that we've supported the engine, we can remove the engine mount. So 6 bolts in total holding this on. And then we'll just do the 3 on the side of the body itself. These aren't hugely tight. This is a longer than normal 3/8 inch ratchet, but it's not exactly breaker bar length, so it just gives you an indication of generally how tight they usually are or should be. Not as tight as you think. And now we'll just remove this engine mounting bracket from the side of the head. This is held on with 3 bolts. There's one there at the bottom. You can see the one above it pretty clearly. And then on the other side there's one just down there. And once we've got that out of the way, it gives us great access now to our auxiliary belt or accessory drive belt, whatever you would like to call it is fine. And that moves with a 19mm bi-hex socket. That's a 12-point socket. And you see this little hole here in the bottom of the tensioner? We pull the tensioner using the 19mm and push it towards the back of the car when we stood up top, and that will align for the pin to go through and lock the tensioner. So I couldn't show that to you because there was, well, you just couldn't see anything because I had to get both my hands down there and the camera couldn't see it. But wait for me to remove it and I'll show you where that little locking pin goes. So now you can quite clearly see that little 12-point bolt, and that's where that little locking pin goes through. So that's quite a simple process to get that off, they're not very complicated. And now we'll remove the crank and the impact gun. Once the crank pulleys off, they just come straight off, they don't need to be pressed off or anything. There's just 3 little E-Torx bolts holding on the lower timing cover. We'll get that out of the way. And now we fit our cam locking tool. Now you can see on the right hand side we have that little dowel, the little notch or little circle in the sprocket, and then on the other side we've got a little dimple or a little tiny little circular ridge. They go above and below that line in the middle, so that there is perfectly timed. So while we've got that timed up there, it's a good time to go underneath and remove this 15mm nut, and then we can fit our crankshaft locking tool. It's actually a flywheel locking tool because it locks the flywheel, but that in turn locks the crankshaft. That's it there fitted. It's just a little metal bar that you just put in there, and then you just tighten down that nut again. Now we check the timing. That's the mark for the crank at the bottom. These are the marks for the cams. And if you felt like you didn't see that properly the first time, don't worry. As the video goes on, we will recheck that about 1,000 times. So now what we want to do is remove the tensioner and the idler. These were T45s, if memory serves me correctly. Not hugely tight. They get tightened down to about 25 Newton meters. And we'll remove the idler completely first. And now we can slip off the belt. We'll just pull that off of that right hand cam, and now we can more easily remove the timing belt tensioner. So now I want to install our new one. You can see there's 2 holes there. There's the hole for the bolt, and then there's a little elongated slot underneath it. There's a little locating tab on the back of the tensioner that slots into. You can't get that wrong. That will only bolt up properly one way. So we'll get that started. Now I make a mistake here. I fit the idler now, and then I install the belt. It's possible to do it this way because I did it, but it would be much easier to fit the belt now and then fit the idler. And you'll see my struggle in a minute when we come to fit the belt. So that's how we move the tensioner. So I started down here at the crank. We just slip the belt on there. And then we come up over the idler. And now I fit it onto the right hand side cam. Now this is where I start getting it wrong. It would actually be a lot easier to do the left hand side cam first. You can see that it has like a ridge around the outside that makes the timing belt difficult to get over it. So it would be much easier to do the left hand side cam first, then the right hand side cam, and then the crank, and then fit the idler. Now you can see the belt does go on as I pull the as I pull it, you can see that the belt will go on. I kept knocking my light, and I'm also stood behind the camera here, so it kind of got in the way, but essentially I just slipped that over. And then I just tightened up the pulleys. I did look up the procedure again after I'd done this, and I realised that you are supposed to fit the idler afterwards. Now the idler and the tensioner both get torqued down to 25 Newton meters. Very important to torque things. You don't want to over tighten it, or worse, not tighten it enough. And then again, we check our timing. Cam marks, make sure they're still in the correct position. We haven't unlocked anything, so they should be, but it's good to check these things. And then we'll check our crankshaft. There we go. So now that we know that we're good, we'll remove the tools now that we've done our last check. So these just slide out, pull that one there out, and then pop that out. And then we just remove that 15mm nut underneath, and then we remove the crank locking bar. Very simple process. Now we just rotate the engine twice by hand, and then we put the timing tools back in and double check the timing. So as you can see, we're still spot on. Now there's no special procedure here for tensioning the timing belt. It has an automatic tensioner, so you don't need to do anything. So now it's just a case of refitting. So we'll fit the lower timing cover, and then we'll put back on the crank pulley as well. It has a keyway, you can't get that wrong, don't worry. Now we'll refit that auxiliary belt tensioner, and we'll refit the auxiliary belt. Now you don't have to do the coolant pump on this, so I'm just showing there. You just put it around the crank, put it around the idlers, and then do the alternator last. I am doing the coolant pump on this. Now you don't have to do it with the timing belt, because it is run off the auxiliary belt system, so you could do this whenever you wanted to. The reason that he opted to do this is because he has a slight leak from the top of his coolant pump. The gasket is starting to let go. So I will start by removing the outer pulley. You have to counter hold the bolts on these. You can't just remove it, because the pulley will want to spin. So there we go. And that reveals the coolant pump. And you can see the pinky crystally stuff on the top. That's where it was leaking. So not a bad leak, but still something that we want to sort while we're here. And we will just remove these 5 E8 bolts, I think they were, possibly E10. Break those loose, get them all out. They're not hugely tight, you don't need to do them up mega tight either. Tap it with a hammer, and then she comes loose. You might make a little bit of mess still, there'll be a tiny bit of coolant in there, but it'll be a lot worse if you don't drain the system first. And you can see there that the old gasket is totally squashed. You can use many different things, Scotch-Brite, sandpaper, to clean this up. I just used this old, it was a brass plated wire brush. The wires on this are actually nickel. I probably wouldn't use a steel brush for fear of putting some deep gouges in the metal. This is an alloy, so it's quite soft. But you don't need to do much. You can see that cleaned up really easily, and that is plenty clean enough for fitting the new gasket. So I like to get the water pump, and I just like to press in the gasket as much as I can by hand to stop it from falling out. And then you have to put it on very carefully. You do not want to dislodge the gasket. You only get one chance at doing that properly. And then I just get some bolts started, and I keep even pressure pushing in on the coolant pump until I get one bolt tightened all the way down finger tight, just to stop that gasket from shifting around. And then I go around and I very, very gently squeeze them all up one by one to make sure I'm tightening down that gasket nice and easily. You don't put any silicone on those, none at all. Let the gasket do the work. If you put silicone on it, you're more likely to create a leak than if you just left it. So I'm sure there's a torque spec for these. I just popped a little bit of thread lock on them, and I just tighten them down with my tiny impact gun, which usually tightens things down to like 30-40 Newton meters. which in reality is probably a little bit tight for these, but they were okay. So we'll start refitting that engine mounting, starting with the casting, those 3 bolts. Fortunately for me, I could get my little tiny impact gun in there, so I tightened them down most of the way. Now for something like this, I'm very inclined, because it holds weight, I'm very inclined to check that by hand. I don't tighten them all the way down with the impact gun. It's very difficult to feel how tight something is with an impact gun. And now we'll fit the engine mounting here. Get these all started finger tight. And then we'll tighten these down. Again, I will go over these and check them again with the ratchet. Just make sure that they're actually tight enough. So now we just want to reinstall that upper timing cover. I just do these with the screwdriver until they're tight. I don't tighten them down with the ratchet. They definitely don't need to be that tight. And now we're back to installing our airbox. You can see that part where it gets caught on the body, that's why I have to put it in on an angle. And you see that lower hose there that we reconnect onto the front. And then we pop our little screw in. And then we refit our hose and our Jubilee clamp. And that's it now. Now that we've rechecked the timing, we've turned the engine over twice by hand, which is a very important step. You don't want to skip that. All we need to do now is pop in a little bit of coolant. Just make sure that we filled it up enough so that it's not totally empty. Just put in what we can till it won't take any more. And then start the car. We want to check for warning lights as well. So that's that. All we want to do really now is take it for a test drive.